We are live. We are live in multiple places. G'day everyone. Welcome to a tasting night here at the Oak Barrel, here physically in the room and online wherever you are in the world. Well, Australia. We didn't send anything around. Sending booze internationally is a pain in the ass. That's never going to happen.
We both just sent packs recently to Mr. Eva over in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And that was painful.
Yeah, expensive and painful. But that's good. But welcome. I think everyone here is reasonably familiar with me. My name is Scott Simons, and I look after all the whiskey and spirits here at the Oak Barrel. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to something very special tonight. A tasting that we've threatened to do in the past, a tasting that we sort of did virtually during the Sydney Whisky Forum last year, and something we are replicating tonight in honour of the return of the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championships. If you can see in front of you, I've been very lazy today and I haven't poured any whiskey for you in the room. That's because everyone who is online around Australia watching, anyone in the room has the exact same experience today. You'll be able to pour your own stuff as we go through and decipher these whiskies. There are 6 whiskies. We don't know what they are. They are completely blind. All you know is the ABV, which is sort of, it's a mini training session for the champs proper. But there's no sheep stations up today. It's just a bit of fun and see if we can get into some good habits before the champs come on. But I would like to introduce, before I go too much further, Matt Bailey, who has been a long time friend and regular of the Oak Barrel, but as we were just about to open the doors, realised that you haven't actually ever presented in this room for society or otherwise.
Or otherwise, yeah. Hello everyone, thank you for having me tonight. This is great. It's just really weird because Scotty and I were just talking about this just like half an hour before anyone got here. He sort of said, as we were setting up all the water, have you hosted in this room before? Have you hosted the Oak Barrel before? And I have to really rack my brain and go, no, I haven't. And I've been working with the Oak Barrel in some capacity, either actually for the Oak Barrel or when I was presenting another whiskey brand or when I was doing anything like that. It's like, and even in the last 6 years I've been with the society, I've never actually, we've talked about it over the years, like, we should definitely do something related to the society in the back room here. Hey, we should definitely do it. And then a year passes and you go, we didn't do that, did we? And it's like the time escapes you. This is really special for me to be here, and it's great to be able to do a champs training session on Parliament. It's a sort of a preview to the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championship this year, which is an event held every 2 years, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. I know many of you already are. Most people here, if you show your hands of who is already a society member, SMWS member, I think most of us are, yep. And who is already booked in for the champs. A few of us already are as well. Christian, you are, because you don't always remember which tickets you've got, so I'm just letting you know now. You are booked in for champs. This is great because this is an opportunity for us to, I guess, like, acclimatise, adjust our palates, and train ourselves up a bit on some of the aspects of each whiskey. So I'm not one of those hosts that likes to talk so much that we haven't even got to the first whiskey yet. So how about, for those playing along at home and for those in the room tonight, let's open our first round of the night, which is number 1. You can still line it out. There you go. You can have that one. So pour the full amount into your glass. I won't start with any of any clues just yet, though.
So, to give a bit of a background, if people aren't familiar, that the champs is essentially a swathe of whiskey in front of you with a list of potential drams that it could be, and you have to match them to what it is. Now, it's a little bit different to tonight because you don't get the ABV at champs, so I don't believe, but we've sort of chosen, and they're probably going to go the first 3 in a bit of a bracket, and then the next 3 in a bit of a bracket. I love tasting whiskey blind. Is one of my truly great joys of drinking whiskies when you don't know what's in the glass. I'm terrible at picking whiskies though blind.
I mean, Scotty is competing this year as well. I mean, he's involved with the champs as well as helping out. Just to give you some background as well on the championships, this year will be the 30th, or last year would have been the 30th, but we're going to pretend 2020 didn't happen. This year is the 30th anniversary of the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championships, 30 years. So just to rewind a moment, there was a pub, a proper pub in Adelaide called the Earl of Zetland. It was demolished in the 90s. But before it was demolished, In the early 80s, it was run by a true old school publican, David LeCornu. Not really a whiskey guy, but he just sort of saw this opportunity to explore whiskey in Adelaide, and he sort of opened what could be best described as Australia's first whiskey bar. And this was the Earl of Zetland, and this is the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. The exact year I can't remember, he started building a collection, but at the peak of the Earl of Zetland being a whiskey destination, it had 360 bottles of whiskey on the back bar. Now these days, yes, you hear bars around Sydney and Melbourne, whatever, we've got 600 bottles on our back bar. We've got 1,000 bottles on the back bar. That's great. I mean, that's more standard these days. But to have 360 bottles of whiskey in the early 80s, when you think about the availability of more whiskey in the early 80s, which was absurdly low. I mean, in Australia in the early 80s, you could get Glenfiddich 12, you could get Highland Park 12, you could Glenlivet Original. That was about all you could get. So to have 360 bottles, David put a lot of effort into importing really special bottles of whiskey and putting them on the bar. This, however, prompted a bunch of whiskey groups and clubs to spawn in Adelaide. This was sort of the birth of where whiskey appreciation in Australia started. And all these groups and associations thought they had better palates than those next to them. And that's where the championship started, with these individual groups coming off the Earl of Zetland once a year and battling off each other and seeing who could test and guess the whiskey blind. And that's really where the championship has evolved in the years since. In 2002, when the society founded in Australia, it was just the year after in 2003 that we became the custodians of the championship. It's not a society event. It's a national event for whiskey appreciators to come together and just guess whiskey and win huge prizes. And you know what? Even if you don't win anything, you get to have a bit of fun assessing whiskey, and you get a lot of fun on the night as well.
As Matt said, I think this will be my third or fourth chance competing in.
Yeah.
And I only realised this year that it's actually not a race. It's actually got to name the whiskies, and I thought you get 10 whiskies and the first one knocking down one. So taking a different tack this year.
And this is actually, there was one competitor at the last champs in 2018 who decided to have a heavily garlic sauced kebab just before rendering, and he wondered why he couldn't taste anything. All he could taste was garlic. Well, there you go.
Want to do a shout out to Whiskey Is My Jam, to Alex Darlenberg, who's trying to trick us by asking what's the first dram there, and to Rob Akers as well down in Melbourne, saying mind your name tags around Scotty. Yes, I do collect name tags.
Yes, and he was the great name tag collector of 2018. There's a photo circulating on the internet of that one.
Yeah. So I'm going to let Matt drive this a little bit, but we've done a few of these tastings with wine, and tasting wine blind is far more prominent than what it is in the whiskey industry, mainly because you get those sommelier courses and master sommelier where you need to be able to pick the vintage and the hill and the grape, within 30 seconds. So there's certain tricks to do it. And I found myself smelling a whiskey like this. I know nothing about it apart from the fact it's 40%, and trying to pick what it was. But the best way to do this is actually to rule out what it's not. So, and as soon as you rule out what it's not, then you get a better, closer opportunity of what it could be. You might have tried this whiskey before, you might have never had it before, but at least if you're narrowing down, you can do it. One of the other things as well that I learned, particularly in 2018, was your first gut is almost certainly correct. So I think it was Ardbeg and Lagavulin, a 10 and a 16 on the list. And I went through once.
10 and 8.
10 and 8. And I went through and bang, bang, and I named it. And then I went back and got in my head, because the 8's got a little bit more alcohol in it, I think. And
slightly.
And I tried to, then I go back, well, hold on, let's think about which has the more alcohol piece. And I switched them around and got it wrong.
The number of people in 2018 who switched around the Ardbeg and the Lagavulin in the lineup is phenomenal. So most people got it right, and then they crossed their answers out and then got it wrong. So, and by the way, in the past, it's been some pretty challenging lineups, as Scott may recall from the 2016 champs, when every whiskey in the lineup was a 8 to 10-year-old Speyside 40% unpeated whiskey. And it was suddenly a very hard lineup because it was 8 very identical whiskies in front of us. The other trick I like to use is just different way of nosing the whiskey as well, which is just basics of sort of appreciation, and that's to nose the whiskey both with your mouth open and closed. And so you're getting a different aroma. I get a much more green apple spice on this one with the mouth open. I think for a 40% whiskey, this has a lot of body.
Yeah.
It has a lot of character.
Yeah, so I'm going to start ruling out a few things. I'm going to say this is not something really heavily peated and big. Also, by the colour and the aroma on the nose, I'm not thinking this is being exposed to a very, impactful fortified cask. So like a port or a sherry or a red wine or something like that. I don't think that's had that element. So immediately I'm starting to narrow what they are. Christian.
So these are all unadulterated. They haven't sort of been brought down to their unique.
Good question there. That we haven't played with these whiskies. These are straight out of the bottle into the smaller bottles. Reza comes in, smells like a blend, which is interesting.
So let's examine that point there from Reza, who says smells like a blend. It's the malt whiskey tasting championship. So there's not going to be any blended whiskies in there. You're not going to find any Johnny Walkers or Chivas Regals in there. But you might find a Johnny Walker Green. You might find a Monkey Shoulder. You might find a Naked Grouse. They are all malt whiskies. They're blended malts. So there's no bourbons in the championship. There's no ryes. There's no grain whiskies. There is just malt whiskies.
There is no wrong answer to this, and I say that knowing fully well that there is one right answer, and every answer apart from that right answer is a wrong answer. But feel free to throw things out, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, I think this whiskey distilled this year from that batch, but just I like that, it smells like a blend. So like, what does a blend smell like that Reza's picking up there? So often not a huge amount of cask influence, so I think it's probably that malty element. They tend to be lighter, at 40%,
Should we start with country maybe? I'm going to go to Scotland.
Scotland, there's a few Scotlands there.
Bourbon cask.
Bourbon cask.
Okay.
Bourbon cask. Does anyone think that they've had this whiskey before? Is it familiar to people? Yeah. Yeah, cool. And because I know in the past, in like a decade ago, the chancellor would actually give you a list of the 30 or 50 whiskies they were going to draw from. These days they don't. So I know that there's a lot of, and I'm purely speculating here. My job today is speculation because I have nothing to do with the organisation, and you probably know or got an idea of what you're sort of leaning towards. But in previous years, they haven't been.
They're already locked in.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They haven't been really weird, obscure whiskies that no one's going to get.
They have to be commercially available.
Yeah.
We can't pick some whiskey out that's a limited edition that was a single cask bottle just at this club or this bottle shop or something. So you will never be able to guess it because you've never tasted it before.
Yeah, and but it was interesting because there's a lot of whiskies on that list that I knew, but I hadn't necessarily tried recently. So like the list comes out and it's Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, Balvenie, like really high, famous distilleries. I, can't remember the last time I actually sat down and had a Glenfiddich 12. Great whiskey.
Yeah.
But I just that's a bit of an interesting thing, and so you sort of lean to what you know. So, question as someone's saying Japan as well. Could potentially be Japanese. It could be Japanese whiskey over there. So, but what do we have? We're sort of agreeing Scotland in the room.
Ireland.
You think Highland
Whiskey?
Highland whiskey?
Ireland.
Ireland. You think from an island?
It could be an Irish whiskey.
Yep.
John, that'll be a pretty small list of Irish malt whiskies.
Yeah. Does anyone want to go a little bit narrow? Maybe say, even though regions are not as dominated by their flavour profile as they used to be, you can get all different types of whiskies from Islay and say Speyside, and they're quite interchangeable. Does anyone want to narrow it down a little bit to where they think it might be from, or even where it's not from?
Speyside.
You think it's Speyside? That narrows it down to 40,000 whiskies. That's good. But yes, Speyside. I would sort of lean that way as well. It's got that lightness. It's, as I say, you get very heavily peated whiskey from Speyside, very spicy whiskey from Speyside. But if this is from Speyside, then I would say it's probably quite in the classical term of Speyside, has those elements to it.
And one of those ones is not quite Speyside, not that Highland. Is that just I think we're
On the cask? on the border there, like a Glengoyne kind of situation, or like a Glengoyne or something.
Well, that interesting question there. So we just had, could this be on the border maybe from Speyside to Highland? And you said something like a Glengoyne. Almost as soon as you said that whiskey is my jam, came up with definitely familiar Glengoyne question mark. So there's a few people in sync here and online as well.
It's very light breakfasty kind of whiskey though.
Yeah. Has anyone had a sip? I've just been nosing. Ted's has gone already. Now, there's one other thing I want to say, because texture is really important. And if you're tossing between a couple of whiskies, and to use an example that I did very poorly at the last Champs, was overthink it into ABVs and that sort of thing. But if you're better than me, and most of you will be, you can actually maybe pull 2 or 3 apart by, if you know the production method. So say if something is a higher ABV, but also things like chill filtration and that sort of thing. Is a whiskey heavy and oily and textural, or is it light and bright and zippy? And often chill filtration can be an indicator of that.
Does anyone have another stab at the distillery, perhaps? The calls? There's nothing. I mean, Scotty says there's no romances, but there are. Whatever. Old Poltony? Poltony, good guess, something like that.
For me, it reminds me of TNE.
TNE, yep. The only problem with that is that they don't have a core range. So it'd be hard to sort of put that in the lineup.
Yeah. Excellent guess though, because it does have that sort of malty sort of front forward thing. But I imagine if TNE did have a core range and bottled at 40%, it'd probably taste something like this. But it doesn't exist. So
yeah.
I think even their flora and fauna was 43.
I guess if it does have a 40% release, it definitely has a very super common Appleton dough into 40%. It's not a super single malt.
Yeah. No, good point in the room here. The fact that it is 40%. The only reason to bring a whiskey down to 40% is really for economies of scale and cost prices, and bring it into a certain
taxation, not taste.
Yeah. So then, okay, if we're thinking about really obscure distilleries, hold on, let's maybe move into something that's a little bit bigger.
The guest is coming through.
Well, I want to say g'day to Jimmy Finnegan, who was meant to be here, but he's at home. He's sick as a dog. But
we're thanking Jim for not spreading it around.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're still watching. You can come pick up your set later, but I don't think it's going to be as much fun if you're watching. You get all the answers. Should we maybe give us a reveal and then talk about it? Before we reveal, I want to throw in a last little.
Yeah, I guess before we reveal.
Let's bring up the big screen here. And I hope I've done this right.
Hey, Anok 12.
So, excellent pick by, I think it was Georgia there saying, there's a lot of Speyside in the room, but maybe it's one of those ones on the edge that's leaning to Highland, because that's exactly what Anok is. But one of my favourite little introductory whiskies, 12 years old. It is chill filtered, it is at 40%. But you almost get that brightness off it. I actually, we did this at a tasting recently with Anok, and we had this and the 18-year-old and some vintages, which were a higher ABV and unchill filtered. And the decision in the crowd by taste was actually this was favourite for a lot of people, because I think it's got that brightness and that rich malt to it. A little bit of that texture coming from their production methods, because it's not a really light whiskey. They do have a bit of oiliness to the dram. So interesting. But I think we weren't miles away there. Rob Akers was thinking Glenmurray as well.
Glenmurray's a good guess as well. Yeah.
So all within that realm. Was anyone miles off?
Was anyone in the wrong country?
Yeah.
Japan was a guess.
It was Japan.
Japan actually use a lot of Scottish whiskies now.
True.
Spirit.
Yes. The other thing is, this is quite readily available. It wouldn't surprise me if something like this appears on the Champs. It hasn't in the past.
It has in the past.
It hasn't been on the Champs in the past. But it's a whiskey that maybe not everyone has tried as well. And that's when again, if you haven't tried this, it's about eliminating what it can't be. And particularly in a situation like the champs, you'll have the list. And if you've never tried this, but then it can't be the other ones, that's really, okay, I know roughly a little bit about it and I've seen it around, that could be it. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting one, but great whiskey, I think.
Great whiskey, yeah. Shall we pour number 2?
Number 2. This is fun, I'm enjoying this. I like these things. You sort of did a number 1 left there.
Yeah.
So you want to have maybe a look at the colour first and foremost, because everyone's talking about colour.
I mean, a lot of the core range whiskies, you may know, are added with E150. They have got a little bit of colouring added. Distilleries do this for purposes of consistency. So every release has the same sort of colour. These two, I can safely say, 1 and 2 are pretty much exactly the same colour. Maybe number 2 is ever so slightly lighter in colour. Maybe half a shade lighter on number 2 in colour. But we've jumped up in proof a little bit here. It is 46%. There's no limit to the proof that can be had on the whiskies in the Champs line. They could be 40%, they could be 65%. As long as they're core range and as long as they're readily accessible. There's no sort of, as I say, no limited bar picks or single cask releases or whatnot.
Now, again, I'm speculating. I have no idea what's going to be on this year's, but historically, there hasn't been much above 46.
That's true. Yeah.
And probably previously there haven't been as many core ranges that have pushed up to 48, 50 and beyond. But now you're seeing a little bit more in that actually core ranges that are at a consistent 48%, like a front quarter cast and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, that's true.
Historically this has been the brackets.
Now, I'm spotting in some of the discernible differences between 1 and 2 straight away.
Sherry cask more.
What was that, sorry?
Sherry cask more.
More sherry on this one, you think? Yep.
So from my knowledge, there is very minimal, if any, sherry cask in the Enoch. So it's predominantly bourbon cask. Just wrap that one up. I want a quick shout out to Cal Tay, who's watching on the YouTube. Scotty said the line, look at the colour. Can't wait to be on your table, mates. It's actually a really big disadvantage to be sitting on my table. Even though the champs is the champs, and there's historically been trips to Scotland up, for grabs. I like to have fun and do my own running commentary on the night. So it's a real disadvantage, which is what makes the reigning champion 2018, Brooke Heyman from Whiskey and Ailments. She was sitting on my table. So anyone sitting on my table should get a bonus 2 points before they start. But she had the handicap of me and still won, which shows how good she is.
I'll tell you, in 2016 we hosted the champs at the Madame Tussauds, and it was a great venue, a little bit troublesome for bumping in and bumping out as an organiser, but it was, being Madame Tussauds, it's so colourful in there. There's so many sort of wild lights going on everywhere in the room. So everyone's trying to look at their whiskies and they can't see a single bit of colour. This one's a bit purple, isn't it? There you go. That's great. And
Makes for a great after party.
yeah, makes for a great after party. And
So we can never go back there. Or?
Yeah.
one of those after parties.
You and your disco lights, band. Couple of comments here. I think the first comment I heard, obviously, maybe a little bit more sherry or cask in there. Then there was, I have no idea what this is as well. I just overheard that. And you're not always going to compare and contrast next to each other, but certainly this is a little bit richer than number 1. You'd expect that from 46. I just actually saw in your glass the legs on this are really
they're a bit thick, aren't they?
yeah, nice and thick, really viscous whiskey. So
I quite like this whiskey. I don't know if that tells you if that's a clue because I like a lot of whiskeys. But I'm quite partial to this one. It's one that I have on semi-regular rotation on the shelf. I think it's a fun whiskey.
but we expect it to be bigger, but because of those legs, we can maybe start to assume some other things about maybe this is unchill filtered. It's got that texture and that body to it. Which again doesn't narrow down, but we are just eliminating things. So at 46%, we can start to get rid of some of those really big brands. So your Glenlivet and your Glenfiddich and that sort of stuff that bottle pretty consistently at 40%. So if you put them to a side, it possibly can't be that. Lots of fruit.
Lots of fruit. Does anyone get even the slight whiff of peat as well? Like just the slightest bit of like wood smoke? Not so much peat smoke, but like wood smoke, just the tiniest bit. I mean, like a bit more savoury, a bit more savoury note in there somewhere. Biscuity kind of note.
Reza watching on the oakbarrel.com/live, I think it's richer, but then has grass and green apples. So Speyside, I guess, is sort of the tack there. Yeah, 100%. I do get that richness and that grassness. I get lots of that appley thing, that fruitiness. I'm going to go through. There was when I asked on the first one, is this familiar? There was a lot of people that it felt familiar, even if they couldn't pick it. Does this feel familiar? This one, or is this a little bit? Yeah.
Still, yeah.
You,
I don't know where it is, but yeah.
yeah. You're quite good at this, aren't you? Though, mate?
No, I'm terrible at this. I'm really, really good at being like,
Yeah.
afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very good at that.
like doing maths in year 12 with a calculator.
Yeah.
I should also just touch on some of the particulars of this year's champs, the things we haven't actually formally announced yet. Third prize this year, there's 3 huge prizes. So third prize this year has been very generously donated by the Oak Barrel, which is a $500 voucher to the Oak Barrel. Second prize is in conjunction with Balvenie, where there'll be a Society at Balvenie pack of some rarities. It's about $2,500 worth of whiskey. And first prize is all expenses paid trip for 2, plus spending cash, plus hotel, plus dinner with Bill and Lynn Lark down in Tassie. I'm really hoping that Tasmania doesn't win this year because I'm just going to send them home. No, full credit. I hope Tasmania does win, whatever. But it's otherwise, I'll have to work out something else. But first prize is always that experiential side of things where it's going to be a special dinner with Bill and Lynn and a few other sort of industry faces in Tassie, and we're going to have a right good time down in Tassie. Everything's covered on that one. So
We're bumping up our prize as well, I think.
Oh, you are?
The 500 gift voucher is the base, but we're just waiting to see what's here.
Oh, right.
Time.
Yeah.
Whether it's we'll probably get a couple of whiskey fair tickets in there as well, but then hopefully we'll have a bottle to throw in depending on.
Well, you heard it here first.
Freight and shipping and all that sort of fun.
One of the other highlights from 2018 for me was also when, as Scotty said, Brooke Hayman from Whiskey and Almond actually won that year. And in the previous iteration of the champs, it was won by a bloke named Adrian Callis, who had been into whiskey for about 3 weeks. So it is a good mixture of skill and luck to win the champs. You don't just have to be a sort of a super palate to win it. But when Brooke won, she won like well ahead of the rest of the crowd. And then second place getter, which was Matt Whisker, also was well ahead of the crowd. But the taste-offs, there's a taste-off section, which is to those when there's a tiebreaker. And everyone thought the taste-offs was the first prize, but they'd already well and truly been locked away. But it was the taste-offs was third place.
We actually had a taste-off member in the room.
We did?
I think John.
John, you were in the taste-offs, weren't you?
Yeah, he came fourth, fifth. Yeah. So
Helen Bolt came fourth, and then and Matt Waller third.
Yeah. Getting back to this, there's some great guesses coming through, and I certainly was looking at a couple and going, that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. And then I tried it, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. So, whiskey's my jam, says Craig Ellehy, which I think is a very good guess.
It's got that spice. Craig often has that sort of pineapple juice and spicy sort of biscuit notes. Good whiskey, Craig.
Reza says reminds me of a Loch Lomond,
okay,
which is a very good guess as well. Loch Lomond also makes a few different types of spirit. So there's a few different ways that can pull. Lee Wallace throws Kilhoman into the mix, which I can see potentially like some of those early 100% Isla releases that were like quite fresh and then the smoke was at the back, they weren't particularly peeled on the nose. I can see that, but I think the current releases at 46, this is not heated enough to be that. And Carl wants to know if Matt is spilling the beans about prizes, can he also start spilling the beans about the bottle code for the Tasting Championships bottle?
Yes.
So
we have a bottling which has been bottled up by the SMWS full single cask exclusive to Australia for the championship, which is cask 7.234. So it's a Longmorn single cask that we've picked out in the Juicy Oak and Vanilla profile. It's an 8-year-old. It's young, but it's a lot of fun. It's a very spirit forward, very oily, rich, lovely spirit from Distillery 7, which has been bottled exclusively for the champs, and it's got its own special label as such as well. So that will be out in July with the championship.
Excellent. Yep. I really like the guesses there. because they're three different distilleries, but they are all in the same well. So Colombia is a little bit of an outlier, but the methods and the way that spirit is crafted, they're bigger, thicker, chewy spirits. Does anyone else have it in the room? Maybe have a guess or just even thoughts on this? I mean, at a base, do we like this whiskey? That's that.
Clonish 14,
Ooh,
10.
good guesses.
Clonish 14 or Springbank 10 from the room. Excellent guesses.
How do you think Glen Scotia was dry?
Scotia, yeah, that would follow that same realm of sort of Pregality-ish kind of Limey-ish kind of flavors. Which one?
Also,
Like lemon, yep.
Because they were lying about the same group.
They were.
They were, not now.
We're dancing right around this one.
We are. I'm actually surprised no one said this one yet, but that's okay. We're all very close.
I think just on what Liam was saying, the people who are guessing things like Clynelish and Craigellity, when I release it in 15 seconds, are going to go, yeah.
I should have said this one.
Yeah, it's almost like there's nothing obvious in blind tasting, but it is probably the obvious one, for lack of a better word, in this world. So shall we reveal?
I think it's time for reveal.
Time for reveal.
Right.
Bring up the screen for the live people.
Ben Nevis 10.
See, I knew.
There you go. I knew it was going to be that. There it is.
You know, started with Ben, right?
Yeah. So Ben Nevis 10 is that one. A readily accessible, lovely 10-year-old whiskey.
Yes.
At 46%.
Yeah, I think there was, I don't know how much of the effects might people on the stream are getting, but there was an audible in the room after that one reveal. To sort of get a little bit technical, this is reasonably readily available, but it has had stock shortages.
It has.
And you generally only see it in independents rather than chain stores. Is this something that would potentially make it onto a champs list, or is it?
Yeah, it potentially could.
Yeah, but this is sort of on the like not the crazy, but it's on the outlier.
Right on the outlier, yeah. It would be an outlier of what would be acceptable. I can't stress it has to be commercially available. Like this would definitely be on the outskirts. This is the kind of bottling you get at the oak barrel, but you probably wouldn't get it at a supermarket. So it's something that is a bit more of more niche in that regard. But it's a great whiskey, and why not?
Yeah, it's always fun during these wine tastings to ask that question: do we like it or not? And there's been plenty of times, myself included, where I have really enjoyed a whiskey that I thought, previously was just average.
Yeah.
And there's been whiskey that I've gone, okay, it's all right, and then revealed it to be like, that's meant to be one of my favourite whiskies ever.
So quick question, for the championship, after this year, would it be next year or 2 years later?
It's generally every 2 years. It's such a big event. So this year we've taken over the whole art gallery in New South Wales.
Right.
So on Domain Road there, which is super exciting to work with those guys. So we've been surrounded by the old and contemporary art whilst tasting whiskey and then the after party. I should talk about the after party because that's a huge part of it as well. And the Oak Barrel have always been very supportive of that as well, which has been, often have different bars set up as well as live music. So there'll be the Society single cask bar, there'll be a Galvani bar. We've also got some great support from our friends this year at Ben Riak and some great support of our friends over at Starwood and Fever Tree. So we're going to have some really nice cocktails, some great drinks coming through and some live music on the night, which is always fun.
Bit of a cheeky comment from Whiskey is My Jam. I've not drunk enough Nicker from the barrel to pick Ben Nevis 10. For those who may not be familiar, Nicker in Japan owned Ben Nevis, and so about 50% of what Ben Nevis produced historically as New Make Spirit is sent to Japan to mature and feature in their various blends. Not just Nicker from the barrel, but I think Super Nicker is quite minor as well, that sort of stuff. But that's going to change now because they need to disclose. So it's interesting to see what that happens. But yeah, great whiskey, and I thought it was, I think kind of a cool one to do. If you just looked at the tasting notes for the Enoch and the Ben Nevis, there'll be some overlaps. They're both quite malty. They both have that green fruit thing, but they're really different whiskies, and so that's a whiskey you can't pick by the notes. You need to taste it and feel it and see how that texture gives you that thing. But that little industrial thing was great. How many people were picking up smoke and different heated elements? That was really cool.
You might like to start pouring whiskey number 3, give it a bit of time to glass. We're maintaining with the 46% for this next one, but as we said, have a look at the colour straight away. The difference of the colour in that one has become noticeably darker.
Yeah, so again, this is a highlight in two whiskies that were the same ABV and were a little bit different. Again, we've got two whiskies at their same ABV, but two are still very different.
What do we get immediately on the nose on that one?
Sherry. That's it. Sherry, yeah. So again, let's start eliminating things. This isn't a big peated whiskey from Iowa.
It's not a light, fluffy sort of Glenfiddich 12 kind of whiskey either. It's not those light airdrops and.
It's definitely got, whether it's sherry or some sort of fortified cask influence on it. You can tell by the colour there. And at the chance, everything is pre-poured, isn't it? So you actually get a bit of a rainbow in front of you. You can sort of analyse quite quickly.
And you sit down in front of 8 whiskies on the champs night with first list. You open the envelope. Take the envelope out when we instruct to do so. And there's 9 whiskies on the sheet. So all the answers plus 1 red herring. And those who, if you can match them up, just 1 to 8 as best you can, you win. And you get 30 minutes exactly. So the championship goes for exactly 30 minutes. Sounds like a long time, doesn't it? Like 30 minutes? No, it's not long. It's 30 minutes to nose and pick out 8 whiskies. So you've got to be organised.
But on that as well, you know, what I sort of said earlier, I've definitely fallen into the trap of using every minute of those 30 minutes when I really should have shut up and gone to the bar 10 minutes in.
Yeah.
the changes I make in those last 20 minutes ruin everything for me.
Everyone makes changes in the last few minutes. If you want the best tip on how to win at the champs, is trust your instinct. Trust your nose and trust your first guess. If you think the first guess is Ardbeg 10 and not like a bullet 8, then keep your original guess.
Cal's popping in here. Matt does love a good Macallan 12 or Macallan 12 double cask.
Does he?
Yeah, you're a big fan there.
I love Macallan.
But so we're in, obviously Cal's in that world is looking for, you know, big name sherry houses.
Macallan 12 is Macallan 12 sherry could appear in the champs. Could be in your glass right now. It's a very good guess.
Macallan 12 is 43% though, isn't it? I think the whole range is 43 in Macallan. Don't quote me on that.
Some of the spirits platform can jump in at any time.
We'll roll that out. I want to.
Is it out on the floor here or?
Aussie?
Aussie? Is it Aussie? It's a good guess. It could be Aussie. It could be Australian malt whiskey.
Yeah. So in that case, are we tasting potentially a bit of youth then? That's dragging from the cask. Question: whiskey's my jam. Jumping in. Number 3, I want to say Glendronach, but the 12 is 43%. The 15 is 46%. So he's ruling himself out because the 12, which he thinks is the flavour profile, presumably, is at the wrong ABV.
Good guess. Good guess. Who said that one?
Whiskey is my jam.
Okay.
Who I believe in the tasting last year guessed the Nantu line. Is that correct?
He did.
So Nantu is
how did he do that? I have no idea.
Taiwanese distillery, and that was last, I think, or second last.
It was second last, yeah.
Like a single cask peated Nantu from Taiwan.
One of the first we had in Australia, I think, as well.
It was, yeah.
It's like someone watching 18 hole-in-ones in a row. Like,
It was like the 138.4 or .5 or something was the first one in the country.
Yeah.
.5?
It was that
.5, yeah. Lovely whiskey, that one. Like stunning malt character, but he picked it blind. He picked a single cask Nantu blind. So
he does have form in this area.
I am worried about Mark's chops at champs this year. I am genuinely worried he might win something. There you go.
James Finnegan says a double cask is 40% from Macallan, so it can't be that.
Okay, there you
He's
go.
at home Googling with his hot toddy.
There's no Googling allowed at the champs bar. You can't have your phone out at the table. Let's put it that way. Not that it would provide you much help, but let's be honest, yes.
Gas chromatograph.
Yeah. No gas chromatographs are allowed at the champs. I need to adjust the rules immediately when I get home.
So, I mean, what do we think? Like, are we agreeing with our friends online? I mean, we said sherry you straight away. Are we agreeing with them in this element? Do it.
15, GD15, I think.
GD15 is a good guess. Now, so we're thinking Scottish then over Australian or potentially Japanese or Indian or anything like that? I mean, it's a hard one. What does a country taste like? What is that? And you sort of, again, rule things out. So as you're sort of talking about with Australia, just with our climate, you tend to get whiskies maturing quicker. So you won't have 15-year-old or 20-year-old or 12-year-old really whiskey in the chance because the only ones that do that, they're all very limited releases and they're not available.
Look, I'll tell you right now, there is no Macallan 30-year-old in the champs. There you go.
But the after party.
The after party, yes. Well, that's obviously free flowing at that point.
Yeah. You can bathe in it if you want to. So what is that then? When we think of Japan, what is their flavour profile? Well, again, the history of Japanese whiskey is rich and varied, but in modern days it's been a very precise, at least what is readily available reasonably, is precise and elegant. Places like Taiwan and India have similar characteristics to places like Australia in that tropical climate where things mature quite quickly, so you don't get old whiskies, but you get very rich young whiskies, and then there's a difference to that. Say, a 20-year-old Scotch whiskey is not equal to an 8-year-old Australian whiskey.
No.
Because they mature differently. So,
Glenfarclas 15?
Glenfarclas 15 is a very good guess as well. That's a very good guess as well.
Just like old sherry.
tastes like old
There's
sherry.
only a few of them still doing sherry.
Yeah.
So so when you're sitting at the champs, you might find one of the whiskies is quite sherry, and it's like that starts eliminating the options like we've been doing now as well. So you're saying which
Very general.
we've heard Glenfarclas, we've heard Macallan, we've heard Glendronach, we've heard Australian. So we've sort of got 4 or 5 options versus 40,000 in space like I said as well.
But let's also then look at what it could potentially be. So places like Benriach, they've done sherry releases. That's what of sherry. Arran have played around with sherry quite a lot. Their ABVs for those releases tend to be a little bit higher. Balvenie, they have nothing really clean, although the single barrel was fully sherry. I think
Single barrel.
Single barrel. So outside of that, there's not a huge amount of core range in Australia that is sherry to this level, I don't think. Reza says it's more Glenfarclas than Glendronach, but I had doubts. Whiskey's my jam. Archie Rose is 46%.
Archie Rose is 46%.
Big call. I don't think that's quite readily available enough to feature in the champs. It could feature tonight because there's no rules tonight.
Yeah, it might be a hard one to feature at the champs in 2021, but maybe in a few years it could make an appearance.
Anyone want to have it? Because this is probably the closest we've been out of the first 3 in terms of guesses. We're nailing it down to a certain type of distillery. We're not jumping around too much. Does anyone want to put their flagpole on the ground and have a stab? Sort of come to the fore, put the sheep station on the line?
I would say luck, or maybe a lack of big luck, the new ones, only because it's just got, it's sherry, but it doesn't have that refined sherry like the Scotch whisky brand. In some ways it's quite dark, a little bit bigger, so it might have had more flavour instead of Scotch honey.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent guess for those. On the stream, we're locking in a lark because it does have that sherry element of lark. Historically, we should be calling it a para in that case, a lot of para casks, because it's got a little bit more vigour and oomph to it. That sort of quicker aging sort of style, which I think is an excellent guess. There's one coming through here. Glenmorangie, 12-year-old Lasanta. Is that 46?
It is, I think. Yeah.
It is. That's a very good shout, actually.
Very good shout, yeah. 40% on Lasanta. That's that cherry extra matured Glenmorangie.
So then, okay, in this instance, Glenmorangie create a really light, delicate spirit, so that the fortified finishes are very quick 1 or 2 year jabs rather than full maturation. So when we're thinking about that, to say we have Glenmorangie and Farquhar and Macallan and Dronach on the list, there's every chance that they all 4 could be there. Okay, you're looking for the lighter spirit, not so much in the flavour, but in the texture and the weight. It's a little bit hard to do now because we're looking at this whiskey in isolation, but if you have 3 or 4 of them, that's sort of what you'd be looking for to sort of divide them up a little bit. Lark Classic Cask is 43%.
The Santa is 43 as well.
Lasanta's 43, so ruling that out.
But they do distillers the short supply of whiskies.
Yes, they do. Yes, there are limited releases.
It's limited release though.
Well, but it could still appear tonight.
It could have been tonight, it could.
Yeah, well, there's no rules tonight. Rob Akers says Abelau.
About 12 or something, or?
Yeah, I can't recall whether it's 43 or 46. My gut says 43. I'm not too
My
sure.
gut says 40 on that one.
Okay, right.
Maybe.
Alrighty, shall we
Alright, the big reveal.
put them out of the
Any other
misery?
last guesses before we do the reveal on number 3? Okay.
Alright.
Ready when you are. Boom.
Yeah.
Glenfiddich 15.
It got mentioned a few times here and certainly on the chat as well. And yeah, so I think that was a pretty good effort in everyone, because it was we were there. If we weren't on Glenfiddich 15, you were there or thereabouts.
Yeah.
I really like the and the Lark marketing team are going to give you a call, I think, to run the next campaign for them. But that's it does have that element when you talk about the Australian sherry whiskies. Lark being a little bit older and have a little bit more stocks to play with, tend to have a gentler style of whiskey rather than these big tannic, bruising 3-year-old sherry casks you get from other places. So, yeah, a bit of a, I think, probably most people in the room have tried this whiskey at one point or another. Yeah, fair few nodded heads. So it's one, but yeah, I think with something like Glendronach, and particularly these sort of releases, I often try them in lines. You try it with, tasting with the 12 and the 18 and the 21 and whatever. And there's been, you do it in a lineup at home and have a bit of fun. You don't, for me, for whatever reason, I don't really drink this whiskey alone.
No,
Itself.
no. But you're always a fan of the 12, which
I'm a fan of the 12.
you are a fan of the 12.
I've always liked the 12.
You would.
I actually think at the moment the 15 is my pick. I'm not a huge sherry head, so when you get into the 18 and 21s, that's too sherry for me. I know sherry heads live and die and swear by those releases. It's not particularly for me, but yeah, I'm a big fan of this sort of style.
Now, Scott said before, there's no rules tonight. He's right. Because we're actually venturing into some strange territory here. We'd like to pour whiskey number 4 into the glassware.
And as I said at the start, we're sort of moving in brackets. So these first 3 were relatively available whiskies that might and could potentially appear on the champs, particularly in that way. And they all had connections. The first 2 were similar flavour profiles, but chill filtered and unchill filtered in different ABVs. The second were both unchill filtered and same ABV, but then different cask treatments. So we sort of went on a journey there. Number 4, and I'm now into territory I have no idea. Okay, I've obviously put this together, the little slide here, but I very quickly just dragged and dropped the images. So yeah, I might have seen one, but the other 2 I have no idea.
So we're moving into cask strength whiskey straight away here. And because we decided to do this together, Scott and I thought it might be sense to throw some society love into there as well. So that's there. That's obviously the big clue.
We couldn't have a society, your first tasting and not do society whiskeys.
Even though it's a chance preview, it's a cool chance for us to actually taste some other casks as well. And this is where that's the only clue I'm going to give you. You know where I am, so that's where we are. So this is the kind of whiskey that will not feature in a champs lineup. It doesn't fit the criteria. But it does fit the criteria of being tasty, and I'd love to see what we could do in terms of guessing again, distillery or region or even cask type or anything like that, and see how close we get in that discussion.
So for people who are not potentially overly familiar with the society, it's a whiskey club, independent bottler, but by and large, outside of some limited lines you do, everything is single cask and natural cask strength. That's it. So these are pure examples of whichever distillery they are. In terms of casting and re-racking, does the society play around with that at all?
Yeah. In fact, our extra maturation scheme, as we call it, where we mature casks for longer in different sort of cask types. And we've got a cask coming up that was 14 years in ex Oloroso, that's gone for another 2 years in XPX. And we do a lot of bourbon into sherry maturation as well, and even sherry into bourbon maturation coming up as well, which is very odd. But when we do this kind of stuff, our additional maturation program was actually kick-started by Dr. Rachel Barry, at the when she used to work for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society prior to being a nemesis on drunk these days. And it was actually it was in her assistance and her training from Dr. Lumsden as well through the society. So we do a bit of extra maturation as well. Does anyone want to take a stab at whether this has had additional maturation or is this single cask? This one.
It makes it incredibly tough because, say the last whiskey we just had, Glendronach, outside of, again, some smaller SKUs, we expect Glendronach to be in a sherry cask. We do, but once the society gets its hands on it, it could be in a bourbon cask.
We bottled an absolutely stonking 11-year-old from Distillery 96, which is Glendronach, a little while back, which was from an ex-bourbon barrel, which is unusual because you don't normally taste that distillery in ex-bourbon. Which makes what we're doing right now extremely hard because as we're eliminating stuff that it can't be, it makes that process harder because I think this is bourbon. I think it's probably a refill cask as well because it's very vibrant. I don't know the age. It might be older than I think it is, but I think it's a relatively 10-year-old, maybe between 6 to 10, maybe up to 11 or 12, that hasn't had a secondary maturation. I think this feels like it's quite well integrated. But then normally I could go, okay, great. So anyone that doesn't really use sherry casks, I can get rid of. So everyone that does use sherry casks, I can sort of eliminate. But in this case, I can't because it might be from a distillery that is renowned for its sherry casks, but it's actually in a bourbon cask.
Yeah. Rob Akers coming in with 10.
You've got a thought. I know
Texture's weird. Texture's weird, yep. Rob Akers coming in on the chat with team refill. So so a barrel that's been used for whiskey, and then emptied, and then reused for whiskey. So
I can't actually remember if this has been if this is refill or first fill. Actually, I can't recall.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. So the influence of whatever's in that cask previously, whether that be sherry, port, wine, bourbon, mead, tequila, whatever it is a long way away. So it's actually very spirit-driven whiskey, which again, thank you, is really hard because you can't go around and just try every distillery's spirit straight off the still.
No.
To have that.
Christian, you've got a thought. I can tell you've got a thought.
A 9 or a 4, I don't know why.
A 9 or a 4? Where do you get the 4 from?
I don't know, I just recently had a few old bourbon casks and it's got a little bit of that body from before.
It's very pretty.
Very pretty, yeah. Which is why I limit to 9.
There's a certain confectionery note to it. There's a certain sweetness to that spirit, which I quite like. Christian said 9 or 4. For those who are unfamiliar, we use a coding system to hide the distillery names. That works twofold for us as a society. One means that you can experience whiskies that are so far out of the house style, so it doesn't even make sense actually mentioning the distillery. And the second reason why that's great is because when we're sourcing spirit direct, and not just through brokers and third parties, if we're sourcing spirit direct from these distilleries, we're not competing with their name or their brand. Some of these distilleries have spent millions of pounds a year on marketing. We're not here to sort of interrupt that sort of flow and get in the way and say, oh, here's your 40% core range and we're going to bottle it at single cask strength. They'll probably just cut us off. What would be the fun in that?
I like the texture of going, and for people who don't have the society codes tattooed on their arm, distillery 4 and distillery 9.
So 4 is Highland Park and 9 is Glengrant.
Yep, 9 is Glengrant. Okay, interesting. So
I think I said
7? That's a good guess as well.
We're staying on the numbers because Whiskey's My Jam comes in. Number 4 could be distillery 1 then. So it's interesting, but we're in that same with what did we say? What was 9? Glengrant, Farkless, and what was the other guess? Sorry, Longhorn.
Who said Farkless?
1. So 1 is Farkless.
Yeah, who said that one?
Whiskey's My Jam.
Right.
that's true. You've done some grand partners.
But they all make similar spirits. They're reasonably well. Farkless and Longhorn make a bigger, thicker sort of style spirit. Glengrant's a little bit prettier.
But they're always, that's the unique nature of single casks. They're always different. And you could have
9-year-old.
a 9-year-old, okay. So who thinks it's between sort of 5 and 9 years old? Who thinks it's between sort of 10 and 12 or something? 13 to 15? Older than 16?
Nope. I tell you what though, I don't think it smells like October. October distillation month.
Only in August.
Yeah, okay. I tell you, if this is bloody October, this is going to be great. Hey! That's right.
No whisky's like.
Are you missing spirit? Do you need a refill? You okay?
No, they don't have wine.
Ah,
There's nothing here, it's all good.
He's saying he's guessing number one.
all right. A few guesses for the distillery one, it seems. Yeah, there you go.
It's not, but it's got that weird funkiness that a couple of recent 35s have.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. 35 is Glenmurray for those playing along. Yeah, it's certainly, I always get like a very soupy, spicy note on some of this spirit in a good way. It's quite a rich spirit quality, and at the Society we get a nice, reasonably consistent supply of these casks, which is good fun. Who likes this whiskey? Yeah. What was that, sorry?
I said 112.
112?
Just play one of those.
You're playing the stat game, aren't you? Yeah. Reasonably
That's a fun one.
consistent. It's not a 43, I'll put it that way.
Keep going. I think I've got a couple of thoughts about the way people are going, which is quite interesting. But they don't hear my mic at the moment, so you have to keep talking.
Okay, you've got my attention. So who's let's see a show of hands for sherry cask there on this one. Okay, sherry cask, and show of hands for ex-bourbon barrel or olive. Predominant, okay, yeah, good.
That's a finished in a bourbon, finished in a first bourbon.
We've done that before. In fact, we've done that just recently. There's a 26-year-old whiskey we're releasing shortly that has had its entire maturation in a refill bourbon hogshead, and then an additional 2 years in a first fill bourbon barrel. So just to give it, just to wake it up a bit, but not move it so outside of the wheelhouse of where it started. It's always we had a few whiskies recently that are not recently, actually a while back, that were some 33-year-old whiskies from Distillery 7, and they spent 30 years in ex-bourbon and then 3 years in virgin oak. And there's got to be a certain stress level involved in deciding to take a 30-year-old whiskey and put it into virgin oak. I think that's something that would, I don't know if I could sleep at night knowing I was doing that.
A couple of comments coming through here. Carly sent Glenmurray. Whiskey is my jam is looking to Distillery 44. The note the point I wanted to make, Arisa says Balblair potentially as well. The point I wanted to make is that everyone, in terms of when they were talking about numbered distilleries, were going for quite low numbers. And the way Society works is when they release a bottling from a new distillery, it gets a new number. So what number are you up to now?
149.
149. But the fact everyone was sort of going for these lower numbers, even though, that doesn't mean a huge amount, they're established distilleries that were around when the Society started and had access to casks. So that tells me everyone in the room or online is sort of thinking this is a traditional sort of, it's a bit more old world. There's not anything like really crazy and weird. I don't think anyone's guessing Nantu from Taiwan or for this one. Which I think is quite interesting. Like that just happened naturally, that people were sort of gravitating towards it. I think that's really important because sometimes you think, I have no idea what I'm doing, but as a collective, we just made that decision without even really noticing it. And it's actually just trusting your little instincts there to go, okay, that's what I think it is then. Great, let's stick to that.
Shall we?
I hope it isn't Distillery 39. That's Scott's favourite. Would be embarrassing. What's Distillery 39?
Liquid.
I bloody love Liquid. That's my favourite. I don't think it's 39. So, all right, let's bring up the screen for the people online and go through. And you might actually have to do a bit on this.
So this is cask 1.230. This is Glenfarclas, and this is a 7-year-old in a first fill ex-bourbon barrel, and it's December.
Oh.
So, it says December, doesn't it?
Yeah, December.
Yeah. This was a 7-year-old in the spicy and sweet flavour profile. You do not see ex-bourbon casks from this distillery at all. In fact, even if you ask them, do you spill into ex-bourbon, their answer is no. They have contracts in place, especially with someone like us, where we are able to source these kind of casks in this kind of spirit, which we've matured ourselves in our casks. And say first fill 7-year-old. It's quite young, it's quite sprightly, it's quite spirit driven, but but it's a good way to start. And the reason why I put this one in as the first one in these latter 3 whiskies is to show that this is where it all started for us. This is distillery number 1. This is that story where Pip and Duncan, 2 blokes, were harvesting barley, being terrible farmers. Neither of them knew how to farm, but one of them lived on a farm. And they harvested about a ton of barley, realised they didn't need it, so they sold it to their neighbours. And they're both exhausted from being, white-collar blokes on a farm all day. And they were drinking whiskey straight from a cask, a sherried quarter cask of Glenfarclas sitting next to the back of the fireplace. Whiskey straight from a cask out of a spigot in their glass. And that's when they said they drank about a gallon between the 2 of them that night. Pip says it didn't get him drunk at all, but chances are he just still was the next morning. And that's when he decided to start the society. And the rest is history. He went to Glenfarclas, asked them for a cask, they told him to piss off. So he went back the following year and they said, no, we'll sell you one. One of the blokes who usually got one off us each year, he just passed away. This was an era when they'd still sell single casks to sort of friends and family of the distillery, if you like. The original sort of definition of family casks in their case. And they sold this cask to Pip, and it was a 125 litre sherry quarter cask for £5,000. And 5,000 pounds. And I didn't get that number right, but it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money either way. I think it was either £3,000 or £5,000, and that kind of money back in 1982 is probably 50,000 by today's inflation and standard. So he realised he couldn't afford it by himself. That's where he started a syndicate, called it the Scotch Whisky Syndicate, then realised the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, the name was available. He got in a bit of trouble with the SWA. He got in a bit of trouble with Belize. He got chased out of the country a couple of times. He's a bit of a wild person, but that's where it all began with the society, and that's where we still are today. We're still bottling the single casks. And I want to start with distillery 1, because that's where it all began for us.
So in what we've been talking about and how we decode blind tastings, we threw out the window then, thanks for that, because anyone who has tried Glenfarclas, and as you say, they say we don't fill into bourbon casks, we're only going to sherry. Yep. So if you have been to Glenfarclas, you've done a tasting, that's what they said, you would have ruled that out immediately. So thanks for absolutely throwing a spanner in the works.
You're welcome.
That one.
You're welcome.
We're splitting number 5. But yeah, I think really interesting, and we're into the fun zone now. Wrong answers are all correct because Matt's in charge and he's picking really stupid, weird whiskies that no one's ever going to get.
So let's pour number 5. We're heading into strange territory again here.
So I have no idea where we are. Now, that was the one I did see the 1 dot. So I sort of had a feeling it was that. But I didn't see.
It's a young whiskey that first one, that first society one, but like I said, it's sort of a window into where it all began. At every society event I host, like if I'm able to start with a 1 somewhere in the lineup, early in the lineup, I do love doing it because it's kind of like we try not to focus too much on the codes, but it's kind of like a window into where it all began. We pick with 1.1, and even if we're up to 230 now.
Whiskey is My Jam points out that release is still available online at SMWS.
That one is still available. We only sell to members, as most people know. We only sell to members of the society. I'd love to be able to sell the oak through to the Oak Barrel and other places, but I'm not able to. But I barely have enough to go around for members. This is but have a look at the colour on number 2 for a moment. It's darkened up a bit. Now, unlike the first 3 whiskies, as Scott said, the rules have been thrown out the window. There's not a romance here. We don't add any artificial colour into whiskey ever. We don't see the need in that. It's all single cask. Even if the colour is different from the cask sitting next to it, it may have been maturing for the same length of time, but still on the same date. They're going to be different casks. They're different spirit. They're different. Everything's changed over that length of time it's been maturing for. And in the last 10 years alone, we've bottled whiskey that's been 2 years old. We've bottled whiskey that's been 52 years of age and everything in between. So it's quite a ride. And the age statement will tell you something. The colour will tell you something. The cask will tell you something. There's a story in each of them.
Regardless of where it is or where it comes from, this is a gorgeous nose,
Isn't it?
It's like lanolin and wax, but I don't think if we were talking about the young numbers before, I think this is a newer distillery.
Okay.
I'm not convinced that it's Scottish. It could well be. I'm not convinced that it is.
I get like lanolin on toast.
Yeah.
Like lanolin on freshly buttered toast kind of note. A bit of toastiness in there somewhere as well.
Yeah. Now you point out did like fresh butter.
It's not a balanced breakfast, but it's enjoyable, that's for sure. I don't recommend eating lamb, just by the way.
Live a little, mate.
Live a little, come on.
That's after party at the Champs territory.
Yeah. That's Scott's part.
Yeah. Bit going on.
Do we think we've jumped up in age a little bit as well, maybe? Maybe not.
Well,
Or do you think we're new worldly? Do you think we're sort of maybe sitting at 5, 6 years of age? Maybe it's 90 years of age, maybe it's 20 years of age, I don't know.
initially I thought older, but not old, but maybe like 12 to 14 or something like that.
Mm.
And now I'm talking myself out of it because the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking new worldly and I'm bringing it down. So whether I just said always back yourself first impression, here I go, I'm going to rip that up and start to go back down the tree.
Has anyone tasted that one yet? Has anyone had a taste of it? Bloody hell. I think I need one of these myself.
And what cask do we think? I like my gut is, even if it's a quick finish, we could be looking at not Sauternes, but some like sort of weird cask splash at the end.
That's good guess.
There you go. Rob Akers says, is this a white wine cask? So, Tokay, yeah. Maybe like this. You guys have played with Moscatel and stuff.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So,
Chenin Blanc as well.
Chenin Blanc casks, yeah. So, I'm not going to put my flag in the ground and try and pick something, but I'm going to put it in and say that there's a secondary maturation here of something reasonably untraditional. So therefore, something that isn't bourbon, sherry, or port.
That's a very good guess.
Good.
Madeira.
Madeira, yes.
Madeira?
Yes, so maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
I get a bit more dry notes in Madeira than usually I do with this, but I get where you're going with that.
Oh,
So thinner.
Ex-Fino, could be Ex-Fino. Although, you don't see much Ex-Fino in whiskey. Probably bloody good
I
reason.
have seen it.
Yeah,
Recently.
most of it's not very good.
No.
We've toyed around with it a bit at the side, but it's they're kind of like, it's a very dry, and it's very unusually undesirable.
Rez is pointing out a type of wine cask. It's dry and funky.
Dry and funky wine cask?
Pick up those notes. Carl here said it's a little volatile, so wine cask finish.
Yep.
So we're definitely, there's like the online group and me are sort of definitely in this realm at the moment. I think by volatile is sort of that, it's got a little bit of jump.
Mm.
You know, and I think we both agree it jumped out of the nose.
Mm.
Like, it's very different to the first four in terms of the way they tried to arrest you straight away.
Mm. Absolutely.
It reminds me of, I don't know, just going through my gut, Paul John Moran.
Like Amber, or Paul John, like an Indian whiskey. Yeah. I get what you mean by that because I get a lot of rich tropical spices out of like Indian whiskey, and I think, by the way, I think Indian whiskey is one of the most underrated countries of whiskey production still. People overlook, especially Paul John. Paul John's great whiskey.
Paul John is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, this is part of it, right? So we're drinking something at cask strength. We potentially, the societies had their way with this cask and throwing it to something different. We're getting that DNA. We're starting to decipher that. I still couldn't put a distillery name onto this anywhere. I still got no idea. But if we're in a situation like the Champs, we'll have a reference guide to go, okay, if this is it, and this is not a core range release, this is something very unique and probably somewhere between 200 and 500 bottles in the world. But this is the time where you go, okay, I know these, I'm picking out these elements, I'm trusting my gut, I'm ruling out the very traditional, we don't move distilleries. I'm ruling out some other things within that.
139?
139 should be Catalan.
Catalan,
Yes. We did bottle from distilleries 138 and 139, the two big whiskey distilleries in Taiwan.
Rez is getting some similarities between the Longrow Red series with that big wine cask.
Yep.
But I don't think it's got the peat.
No, it
but
also
so
doesn't
there's-
have the devil smell.
Yeah, but I think there's a bit of funk in there though.
When you get when you crack a long road, it's like hell for a while.
I'll agree with that.
It's the sulfur.
Yeah,
Big sulfur.
I'm not a huge fan of sulfur. And I don't get any sulfur. I don't get any sulfur on this at all.
No, it's not a.
Whiskey's my jam. Does it have a worm tub influence, which is very interesting. Worm tub is a style of condenser. Worm is the old name for serpent, and so a worm tub condenser is a big tank of cold water that has a coil, a copper coil that goes through, and you push your vapors through there to cool it down. In modern times, we have shell and tube condensers, which are basically the opposite. You've got a big tube with a whole bunch of little copper pipes in there, and you pump water through that. So you actually get more contact of copper with the spirit vapors than you did in the old worm tub influence. So when they're pointing out maybe it's got a bit of worm tub, it's a heavier spirit.
You know, sulfur.
Yeah, particularly in its remake stage, it has a sulfury element that over time burns off in the cask. So I quite like that, but I think again we're picking out different things.
I'm going to go with massive no. This is not a worm tub distillery, but I can see where you're coming from.
But that funk that I think might be coming from some sort of wine cask, they're picking from a worm tub. Yeah, so we're actually getting to we're answering the same question just with different solutions, which I think is quite fascinating.
Umami spirit angle going on.
Yep, umami spirit, yep.
Carl says 12.49 ex-IPA cask.
Is this the way to Amarillo, is the name of that one, which is in tomorrow's outturn?
It's not that.
What's
It's not that?
No,
You tasted that, you
No, it's
tasted
not
that.
that.
It's the wrong
You got
idea.
it.
Yeah.
That one's 60.
Yeah, right, okay. Picking up ABVs,
For people, again, people who don't have the code tattooed on their own, what's 12?
Ben React.
Ben React? Well, but yeah, it could definitely be Ben React. It would fit all the.
We have that's in tomorrow's outturn,
Yeah.
which is an ex-IPA cask, Ben React tomorrow, which
That one is good.
overall sell,
That
unfortunately.
one is good.
But it is good fun.
Rob Akers jumps in with a 135, which I'll get you to decide for me again.
Loch Lomond.
Loch Lomond. He says 135 wouldn't surprise me on this. Again, Loch Lomond's a really tough one to.
Cards.
Yeah, Loch Lomond's a really tough one to pick because they make a really
Such a-
diverse
yeah.
style of spirit.
Lots of different spirits there.
I'm going to, Georgia?
Amarone was the cask straight.
Amarone.
I think like it was solid maybe or something.
Ex-Marsala, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. What did I say first? I said,
You said New Orleans.
Madeira.
no.
No, someone else said Madeira.
Yeah, sure. I said something else. Was it? I said Sauternes first.
Yeah.
But because I was getting
That
that.
is nearly sticky sweet enough for something.
No, but I got that honey.
You got the sweet honeyness.
Yeah, got the honey in it. Yeah, I think I'd like to rephrase my answer and go with Georgia on this one. See if I can see some Amarone. Distillery 68 says Mark Teague. Clarify.
He does like his 68s. Big shout out to you, Mark.
So I'm gonna bite the bullet here and make a fool of myself.
Your guess is?
I'm thinking a wine cask finish, probably a white fortified style wine cask finish from a distillery that it's got a bit of bulk to it. So I'm going to go ahead and say maybe who would sell casks. I don't think it's this, but I do love this distillery, so I kind of hope that it is the Dalion.
I knew you were going to say Dalion.
I think you bastardised a perfectly good cask of Dalion and actually made something very good as well. Dalion, one of Diageo's workhorse distilleries. Again, it won't appear in the chant because they don't have a core range release.
I only wish that they did.
Yeah, but a great heavy industrial style spirit without being peated and smoky. I think this is actually a little bit too refined and pretty to be Dalion. But because I'm standing here making a fool of myself, I have to lock something in. That's what I'm going to go. That's what you're going to do with it. Okay. Long menthol on the finish. How many Arons have you bottled?
About 70 or 80 now.
Could be
171.80 or something we got up to.
Did you say Aaron?
121, sorry. Yeah, Aaron, yeah.
Yeah. There's a worm tub at Dalion, so you just said there wasn't a worm tub. I forgot.
No one touched.
I'm already wrong. Here you go.
It's an Aaron.
I think it's Aaron. Okay.
Shall we do
I'll tell everyone a bit about it after we do the reveal.
Bring up the screen for the people online, and we'll go to
112.70 toffee cough syrup and a 12-year-old in the sweet fruity and mellow. This is Loch Lomond Distillery, but it's their Inchmurrin Spirit Rum, which is the code 112. So big shout out to Rob Akers who said 135 because he's in the right distillery, just a different spirit run. It's very close. This is off their tall copper column-necked pot stills, if you like. So this is sort of their strange looking sort of UFO shaped stills. And this particular cask is A, 12 years old, B, sweet, fruity and mellow. C, has had 10 years in an ex-bourbon hogshead before having an additional 2 years in a first fill toasted STR barrique. I'll talk about that in a second. And the yeast on this one is a French ex-white wine Chardonnay yeast spirit.
We forgot to guess the yeast type.
Think about that. So this has had 2 years of additional maturation in a first fill STR barrique, which is a cask type that was pioneered by Dr. Jim Swan, the late Dr. Swan, who did a lot of work with a lot of distilleries in Scotland, primarily Kilchoman and a few others. And one of his greatest achievements was pioneering the STR, the shaved toast rechar, which is a format of cask these days used in ex-red wine casks to really rejuvenate and reawaken those kind of casks and give us those kind of rich toasty elements to the spirit. And it has meant that distilleries, like the other distilleries he worked quite closely with, like Catalan and others, have been able to produce a very young spirit that is quite well integrated. And it's rather than waiting sort of 8, 9, 10 years in a refill bourbon, they've managed to be able to create an incredible spirit after 2, 3, 4 years, and even beyond. I mean, the oldest Cabernet, for instance, just to go back to that distillery, has been, I think, an 8 or 9-year-old single cask or something bottled for someone, which tasted like looking at fence post. And this it was so tannic. It was, but this is like I say, a very funky spirit from a wild distillery that has 5 codes with us and 13 different spirit runs. And this is their 112s. We get 112, 122, 135, G9, and G15 from this distillery, which is great to see such a diversity of spirit from one distillery. So they do have a core range. Lachlan and Inchmurrin have their core range. I think there's just an Inchmurrin 12 and 18 on the market these days. I don't know. And yeah, I think this is just a fun example at 57%.
So I didn't get the name, the distillery right. I didn't get the cask right. I got the age right, then changed my mind.
Yep.
And
So there's the champs. There's the champs.
So it's a classic example. I went somewhere between 12 to 14 years and then changed my mind and went back.
Yep.
So it's a classic example of what not to do at the champs. So I got virtually nothing on that. It's a December cask fill date as well. So I didn't even get October on that one.
Again, no October for you.
But yeah, we are getting into some quite intense territory when it comes to these bottlings now. I think, and Rob Akers is very true when he says 112, 135, the same thing. I reckon he gets. I'll give that one to him.
Yeah, like I said, you got the distillery right, Rob. You're right on the money there.
So was that, the yeast was a white
Ex-French white wine yeast.
Right.
So it's a Chardonnay yeast strain.
STR.
STR red wine
cask.
cask.
Sure.
Right, so the
I don't feel
wine,
nearly as bad now.
So it's a red wine recharge cask,
That's right. So it's a red wine STR.
but the yeast is one traditionally used to make Chardonnay.
Yes, it's a Chardonnay French yeast.
And what would that do? Would that give some of those fruity notes to what we were playing with before?
It would provide like a different sort of balance to the spirit. It would be a very sort of fruity, very fruit forward, very yeasty fermented spirit.
I can see Georgia there,
Very grainy kind of spirit.
he obviously works in wine, trying to put all this through the prism of wine knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's pour whiskey number 6 if you haven't already. I encourage you to do so.
Number 5, Scott got region right. I don't think I did.
Let's just say that you did.
No, because I wasn't even sure it was from Scotland in the end.
Yeah, that's right.
I barely got country right. So back to where we started from. When we first tried Aranock, number 1, we eliminated heavily peated big whiskies straight away. In this case, the first thing I'm going to eliminate is
Anok.
well, no, not to
They do.
I don't feel very good at peated peat hard. I'm going to eliminate unpeated Anok.
Okay. Well, you've eliminated 3 expressions. Yeah.
That's good. So it's better than what I started with.
Does anyone want to take a first stab on the country on the nose on that? Scotland?
It is getting harder and harder to pick Scotland away because they are Scotland and Scotch whisky and Scotch whisky that even though a lot of countries are now forming their own identities, a lot of their formative years were going to try and copy Scotland. That we had the boutique whiskey company Bakery Hill
Mm.
And I reckon if you did that in a blind lineup, you would get people picking that as Ardmore, like the old school pre-96 Ardmore stuff. So it's getting harder and harder, but for me, I'm going to go with the decision of the room, Scotland. If it's not Scottish, it's a very good imitation. Paul John actually flew over Isle of Peace to India to smoke their own 6-row Himalayan barley. So that makes it really difficult as well, because you can't use that terroir of Ireland. But I think, and again, initial impressions are often the best. It's peated, I think it's Scottish. I think this is Ireland. This has this iodine, this coastal note. It's not a mainland peat, so
it's a very thick nose on it, isn't it? Like, it's not just that sort of, how some peated whiskies, you get that sort of like light white smoke going off the top of it.
Yeah.
This has got like a ham sandwich worth of smoke in it.
I was about to say ham sandwich.
Yeah. There you go.
Josh Newman, straight off the bat, Kalila.
Yeah.
Kalila.
Yep. Good guess.
Today.
Ted, what do you reckon?
Yes.
Yeah, he's enjoying it.
It's also the numbers game. There's a lot more Korea around than anything else.
I think, yeah, that would be the only other thing that jumped out to me straight away was, and because of the thickness, was some of the Peter Doorn-Harvens.
Yeah, it's like peated 10s we've had through.
You see them in, Gordon MacPhail do some as well, that have this sort of breadth to them, but the chalkiness and the ashiness and the type of smoke, I'm leaning to Kalila as well.
The ABV suits titillated tickles.
Titillated by 10 tickles?
Yeah.
Yep.
I have no idea what society nerds are talking about. Presumably, Titillated by 10 Tickles is the name of the thing. It's not an after-party reference. It's both. Okay, yeah.
It's a good guess, good guess.
So both Rob Akers and Whiskies My Gem are picking this as a 53, and about 10 years old. 53 is Kalila. Anyone want to, protest the Kalila and say this could be something different?
I don't want to.
No, I'm not going to. I made that mistake last time by double guessing myself. I haven't tried it.
I see you're coming out with the Bunnahabhain note though. Because some of the peated Bunnahabhains have got that sort of like, really sort of like, as I said, ham sandwichy kind of note to them. Like sort of smoked ham sandwich kind of thing going on.
Can I throw out the Bunnahabhain compared to Kalila? What are the cereally kind of bulk cereal?
So,
Grainy stuff.
yeah, giving a little bit more, so another vote for potentially Bunnahabhain there in terms of that raw cereal note. I mean, there's a bit of colour on this. I don't think this is 5 years old. I think this is closer to 10 years old, or maybe up from there. But it's still got, well, it's sitting at 60% flat. So it's still hell, so like it's not old in the smoke. It's not optimal style, get it out of the cask as soon as it stops tasting like New Make spirit to keep as much smoke as possible. There's other things going on. It's had a bit of age, but it's not, I wouldn't say this is older than 12, I don't think. Still a fair bit of spirit there. Maybe, I'd probably, I don't know that I'd say refill though, I'd probably say bourbon barrel or first fill or something like that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Hoggy.
He says knowing full well what's in the glass.
I can't remember the cask details of this at all. I can remember the code and what it is, but
It feels right, though. It's super vanilla.
Yeah.
Rob Akers says he's backtracking. 53 was a joke. I reckon that's a 10.
I'm joking.
What's his name? Bunnahabhain. Okay.
The first one.
No, I know what this feels like. Don't jump off the boat. I'm in my boat and I'm not leaving. I know it looks green on that boat and the bar and the band are playing louder, but I'm standing here, sinking on the Titanic.
You have a fine spot.
Yeah. No, I do not, but I'm going learning.
It's
We had a whiskey previously that's quite similar to this. The nose is quite light, but when you drink it, it's quite big. For me, it's the Lafroy that I had previously.
Yep.
For me, I think it's
Could be the fruit.
I don't know.
Okay. Could be 29.
Good, good comment there. Just in that the smoke is appearing more prominent on the palate than on the nose. So that's where that's coming from. The other thing is, we're at 61%. Often I find a few drops of water actually brings out more smoke, because sometimes the peated elements of smoky whiskies at cask strength can be a bit shy, because it's competing with so many other high volatiles to get up. So.
The first 5 codes of the society when we were founded came along, first 4 codes I should say, came along very quickly. They came around in the first year of the society being founded, which was Glenfarclas for 1, number 2 was Glenlivet, number 3 was Bowmore, and number 4 was Highland Park. And then the brains of the operation joined finally, which her name was Anne Dana, and she sort of led the society for some years. And she brought along Distillery 5, which was Auchentoshan, and Pip Hills, the founder, said, why would you ever want to bottle that spirit? It all tastes like soap. And so it's not, I don't think it's any of these first 5, and I know Scotty's a huge fan of Auchentoshan, so.
I'm just going off screen. A few good comments coming through here that are all in the same world a little bit. Cal Taylor, grasping at straws, 16. They're saying it can't be a 10, it's missing hot sand and black sea stone notes, which are very particular notes.
The thing is Glen Turret, and we do see peated and unpeated expressions from that distillery.
Yeah, root more Glen Turret. Yeah, I don't hate that. Josh Newman, who I think was first off the bat with Kalila, coming in again, similar to the Portuskeg, 100 proof, but with a bit more oomph. And I'm not exactly sure where Portuskeg is coming from, and it's jumped around distilleries in the past.
It's pretty much from one distillery now.
Yeah, that and a bit of Bunna as well, but I think it's Kalila and Bunna Harden. So again, in that world. Okay, so whiskey's my jam coming through here. Number 6, Isla, yes, but I feel it isn't dirty enough for the heavy Isla peat. Some more Kalila feel about it. Yep. So we're does anyone think it's not from Isla at this point? Yeah, what do you think it's from?
I think it's an English one.
English peat. Okay.
It's been done. 134.
That's,
Could be 134, could be one of the English whiskey distilleries. We've bought a couple of those lately.
that's
Garden shed.
Could be garden. No, it's too low proof for garden shed.
That's true.
Garden shed was stupid. That was like 68 point something %.
So it's such a hit.
Which one?
Where's Taylor's?
Oh, that's mine.
I don't know the Curtain Cask because it's been that long since we've seen a cask from it.
It's a long.
Should we do a reveal?
Let's do the reveal.
Let's do a reveal. All right, I'll bring up the screen for those online.
The most interesting thing about this reveal is the fact that so many people got it right and then started changing their minds. That is 53.354 titillated by 10 tickles.
Nice.
It is a 9-year-old single cask Kalila.
Hey, you jumped off the ship when
No, I was in the shit. I was in the shit.
Okay.
I was not listening to the
In the pin
man.
profile, refill ex bourbon hogshead. So it is a hoggy, and it is 10 is very close. It's a 9-year-old single cask that was a part of our exclusive, and I think is available to members now. But it was a 9-year-old titillated by 10 tickles. So everyone who thought Kalila was bang on the money. There you go. It's a very consistent. The nickname for Kalila in Isla is Mr. C. It's Mr. Consistent. It's consistently great spirit. We've obviously got a great relationship with Kalila as we've bottled now, at that point, 354 casks in 30, 80 years in society. And
How much do you bottle of Kalila compared with the rest of the islands? I see it a lot in
I mean, we've also bottled a lot of Ardbeg, a lot of Bemore.
But I can see consistently everywhere. It's available.
Oh, yeah.
If there's nothing harder available as
You've got to remember, like Kalila produce, more than double any other distillery on the island. So they've got the output to be able to supply it.
And they're obviously not shy about giving it out.
No, and we even in the last 12 months alone, we've released everything from 7-year-olds to 32-year-olds from that distillery, and a lot in between. So it's there's always a good gamut of availability, and I think that's a great thing. In fact, I should just mention that the Scotch Whisky Masters Awards were 2 nights back in the UK, and 53.222 Carpe Diem won the Master of the Whole Show, which is a 30-year-old refill sherry cask, which is one of ours, which is great. So 53, we got it. We're on the Isla. Everyone who thought 53 on the live stream on who's playing along at home tonight was correct, and everyone who's here, I think most people guessed Calera. Most people thought Calera at least.
Yeah, Rob Akers, I think, got sucked in. He says, bloody Champs effect.
Champs
Because
effect.
he heard the band playing on the other boats and jumped ship. That was a more attractive place to be at the time.
The 10 dot band.
Yeah, band, yeah. But, like, I know that I was on the fence as well, and, maybe throwing a bit of Warner Harvey out there. There were certainly elements of that. I loved actually the Glen Turret. I think it came from online, the Room More sort of thing. So even if you didn't, lock in Calera in your mind for this one, you were still very, very close to the fact. And if you are in something like the Champs, you tend not to have just one peated whiskey, because that's going to be very easy to do on the lineup. If there's only one peated whiskey there, you're going to guess it. So it tends to be two, and so it's actually a little bit easier when you can do two peated whiskies side by side. So you're not just getting smoke on one and 8 others that aren't peated, because you can pick up the differences when you've got something to contrast it against. Yeah, that was actually quite difficult, but yeah, I'm glad I stayed with my friends on the sinking Titanic.
So that's sort of some of the tips and tricks on Champs this year. And even if you're not coming on Champs, it's a good opportunity for a bit of palate training tonight and a bit of sort of exploration of flavour and how to pick things blind. Like Scotty said at the beginning, I am too also a huge fan of blind tastings. A chance to taste things when not knowing what's in front of you, because then you're assessing entirely on flavour, rather than being influenced by brand or code or number or whatever. And that's exciting for me, because you get to explore what's in your glass and what the flavour is of each of those spirits. And all three of those first whiskies could very much make an appearance in the Champs. And I always love doing what I like to call bluff, double bluff, triple bluff, quadruple bluff moments. And people see that Balvenie is going to be one of the helping sponsors this year, and expect a Balvenie 12 in the lineup, or maybe there is, or maybe there isn't. Maybe there is again, and then there isn't again.
One of the only whiskies I picked in the 2018 one, or maybe the 2016, when Glenfiddich was sponsoring.
That's right.
And because you get the list, and there's one red herring, and there was Glenfiddich 12. And everyone, whether they're sponsoring it, must be on the list, because it would have had to buy X amount of bottles, because there's a lot of people, it's a bit of investment. I was like, that's a Matt Bailey thing to do. It's like, before I tried anything, I went, that's not on there. And it's one of the few I got right by playing the man and not the ball in that situation.
That's right, well played. And the best part about that year was that the brand manager for Glenfiddich was sitting at one of the tables and competing, and only a day earlier he passed me 3 bottles of Glenfiddich 12 and said, oh, this is for the Champs, you put in the lineup. I'm like, oh, that's great, thanks a lot. And then made it the red herring, and then at the end of the Champs, I gave him a bag full of 3 bottles of Glenfiddich and said, there's your bottles back. So he was, he thought one of the whiskies, he picked up, I walked past his table at the end, at the beginning of the championship, and he's going like this, and he goes, it's definitely Glenfiddich. Definitely isn't.
So the Champs are sold out.
They are. We might have a third and final release of tickets, maybe. And by third and final release, I'm talking maybe 4 or 5 tickets left.
Right. So
nothing on sale at the moment. I'm sorry, it has sold out. It's about 200 tickets only for this thing, but it's there will be spectator tickets still available, which will be non-competing, but you want to compete. You may as well compete. It's basically you've got to compete.
I've just put the website up there. I think there's an email sign up. To be, if you want to grab one of those very last tickets. But when you come to the Champs, we'll see you there. If not, as you said, Matt, this is so much fun, and whiskey is about informing and enhancing conversation. That's where whiskey comes from. It's part of the culture, and you've got a bottle of whiskey, you can talk about whatever, but when you do things blind, it really makes you think. And we've had a lot of fun in this room, and hopefully you've had a bit of fun at home as well, just really challenging yourself and getting things wrong and getting things right, and hopefully coming away with a deeper understanding of what whiskey is and what it can be. And it's not always face value. So
exactly.
A big thank you to Matt for coming down and breaking his oak barrel cherry.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It's been great fun, and I think Champs or no Champs, we should maybe do this every 4 or 5 months.
Yeah,
2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah,
it's bloody good fun.
Doing blind tastings is a lot of fun, and exploring by flavour rather than just by name.
And I like this idea of me picking 3 and then you picking 3.
Yeah.
And I think next time I'll actually bottle.
You do the bottle.
I'll bottle our 3. You bottle your 3. Then we'll bring it together.
Okay. And that way, at least half.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put one whiskey on.
Yeah. Well, Jameson.
Jamo. 6 samples of Jameson. Pick them apart.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's definitely going to be a Jameson in there. Thank you to everyone watching on the stream. Rob Baker says, Champs is the most fun I have had being Ron about whiskey. Carly says, hopefully Jared and I will be allowed to have Victoria by then. Yes.
Yeah, fingers crossed for our Victorian friends at the moment.
We've had a pretty rough time of it the past 12 months, and we really hope you're getting out of it sooner rather than later. And particularly for all the bars down there, some of the best bars in Australia, certainly down there. So yes, Carly, we're thinking that. James Finnegan says, thanks for the night. Thanks, mate. Good to see you. Hope you're feeling better. And to Whiskey is my jam. Great fun tonight. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, awesome. Look, we might say farewell to the people online. Enjoy. Drink the rest of your jams if you haven't finished them already. And we will see you at the next one.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.